Hello, thank you for the introduction. Fame, infamy, I think they probably go hand in hand at the moment. What I'm going to do today is look at these two concepts of hope and optimism through the classical Greek lens. Very often, hope and optimism are used interchangeably. We think that they're more or less the same thing. What I want to explore today is actually whether they are or not. Do they mean the same thing for us, and actually what relevance do they have to character education and to institutions? And in doing so, I want to take it from the micro, the individual, to the macro, systems, organizations, and institutions. So, we first come to hope in the classical story around Pandora. This is where Elpis, the female personification of hope, is introduced to us. In fact, we don't actually see Elpis. The whole story is she doesn't appear at all. So I have to go back a little bit to Zeus. Zeus has this battle with the Titans. He wins, of course, he's Zeus, defeats them all, but he makes friends with Prometheus. And they become BFFs, riding around on their bikes together, having high larks, until Zeus decides that he wants some further entertainment. Netflix hasn't been invented yet, so he wants to create human beings. And he asks Prometheus, or Promo, as he called him by now, to design these. So Prometheus does a brilliant job. He designs these brilliant, beautiful human beings. Zeus likes them. Prometheus likes them a lot. So much so that Prometheus wants them to be able to grow and develop and progress. Zeus doesn't want that. He wants them as his playthings. So Prometheus goes behind Zeus's back and he gets fire and he provides fire to human beings, hence starting their evolution and their development. Now Zeus finds out. Of course he finds out. He's the king of the gods. It was inevitable. And really angry with Prometheus, he punishes him in a really horrible way, which involves his innards being pecked out by birds for eternity. And such, you have friends becoming enemies and the creation of frenemies. But Zeus also wants to punish human beings. He wants to put them back in their place. And he does this through Pandora. He gives the beautiful Pandora this box, in fact, it's an amphora, and he tells her, whatever you do, don't open it. Now, those of you who know the Adam and Eve story and downfall of man, you see there's some resonances between this. Tell somebody not to do it, and they do it. And also, from a Minister for Women's and Women's Liberation, you've got the same old story of it's all women's fault. And Pandora, inevitably, she opens the amphora. And out of it floods all the evils of the world. When she quickly realizes what she's done, she puts the lid back on. And she traps inside hope. Elpis. Now, the modern interpretation of that would be humankind has been left with all these ills, all these evils, and they haven't even been given hope, the final cruel stroke. But that's not how the Greeks saw it. How the Greeks saw it was that hope was the most evil of all. It was the greatest possible danger. And I'm going to leave you with that question for the moment about why that is. And we're going to move to another Greek story, the Odyssey. Now, this is actually the journey that Odysseus took in his 10-year trip from the wars of Troy back home. Commuters will sympathize with that kind of journey. It is a story which is told in 12,000 lines of hexameter verse, and it follows the adventures of this wily, complicated Greek hero. It's about a man trying to get home. But the story actually starts 7 years in. He's actually on his 10th year. He's spent the first 3 years trying to get back, and he ends up on islands with Calypso, the nymph, and he's stuck there for 7 years, wanting to get home. And therefore it's told in flashback about the adventures that he had. Those adventures included one-eyed monsters, man-eating monsters, murderous giants, involved witches and sirens, all sorts of complications and obstacles. Odysseus is an adventurer. He's a bit of a pirate, and he's also a refugee. And the question that comes from the Odyssey is, why does he keep going? Why is he still trying to travel home? How does he overcome all of these obstacles and still keeps on his path to get home? He does get home. I won't give you any more plot spoilers if you haven't read the story. And if you can't be bothered reading the story, you can watch Prison Break, which you'll find an awful lot of analogies, including a one-eyed man, Poseidon, who comes into it, and even the names that are used. So, what propels him during this time? Why does he keep going during all of that story? What lessons do we learn for us today about that? Well, let's come back to the story about Elpis and Pandora. Why is it that the Greeks felt the hope was the greatest danger, the greatest evil? Well, let's look at how hope is determined. It's a desire or wish. It's a want in something, a confidence the future will be better, and a dissatisfaction with the present. Very often it's associated with belief in God or a God, and the idea that some things could be better if you hope or wish for them. Compare that to optimism. As Nicky just said, the origin of that is in the Latin. It's optimus, the best things. It's a philosophy that Leibniz explained in terms of the best of all possible worlds, demonstrated by Voltaire in his book Candide. And it looks at the most favourable outcome. So let's look then at Odysseus' story through optimism. Was it hope that was driving Odysseus to get to his end, the wish that things will be better, the dissatisfaction with this long journey? Or was it optimism, his belief that what he had at the moment was the best possible scenario he could have and to make the very best of it? This is illustrated, I think, with the story of the sirens. So the story of the sirens goes, the sirens had this beautiful song which lured men to their deaths. Again, not a terribly feminist point of view. And therefore his crew, knowing this is happening, said, well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to stuff our ears full of cotton wool or whatever they could find, so we won't hear them. We can still sail a ship, we won't hear them, we'll be safe. But Odysseus is having none of it. No, he says, I want to hear the sirens, so strap me to the mast so I can hear them without being affected. His men do nothing because they've stuffed their ears full of cotton wool and they didn't hear a word he said. But that's exactly what they do. They strap him to the mast. He gets to hear the sirens without being affected. He's taken a challenging and difficult situation, and rather than hope or wish that it was going to be different, he's taken the best out of it. This is an opportunity to hear the sirens. How can I turn this difficulty into an opportunity? And that's how he approaches his whole journey within the Odyssey. Opportunities to increase his renown, his name. When he escapes the one-eyed man-eating monster, he has to tell him his name. He has to have his reputation. As a result of doing so, Poseidon, who was his friend there, turns against Odysseus and makes the journey even harder. But he couldn't resist that. The opportunity to be well known, to be renowned. His journey then becomes an adventure. And that's really the difference between hope and optimism. Alfred Lord Tennyson picks this story up in his poem Ulysses. In the final lines of that, which our students should be familiar with, he says, we are not now that strength which in days of old moved earth and heaven. That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That final line our students know because it's our motto. But there's another line in that which has become the motto for another enterprise, which takes us from the micro, the individual Odysseus, to the macro, the institutions. And that is the Odyssey Trust for Education. We take the line for this, one equal temper of heroic hearts. and it is an optimistic enterprise. You take a situation where, and this may be well documented on TV at the moment, you have a selective school in a selective area, which by its existence means that the neighbouring school is non-selective and secondary modern. Now you can take a view of that one is the cause of the other. One school's ills and failings are the result of, as some people wrongly accuse it, creaming off the best to another school. But that wouldn't be an optimistic view. An optimistic view would be if you have these two institutions next door to each other, isn't this an opportunity to collaborate? Isn't this difficulty that's caused by a selective process something that could become an opportunity for us for something even greater? A collaboration, or in this case, a multi-academy trust, a union between those two schools. How can you take the best of those and make something that is greater than either one of them individually is? And that's where we take optimism from the individual to the institution. Can we effectively, particularly within education, create optimistic institutions? Can we take an optimistic educational philosophy? If you were to listen to the educational dialogue that's been current in however many years recently, it is woefully negative. It is about what we do not have. It is about the us and them. It is divisive and it is segregation. It is about failure. There isn't currently a sufficient dialogue within education about optimism. And as a school leader, that's really worrying, because in front of me I have the future. If we can't convey through our institutions an optimism for the future, what can we expect from them? Wherever their individual challenges are, actually how can they be optimistic about an education and a future that actually doesn't build optimism into it from the start, that sees every difficulty as a disaster, that relies more on hope, a wish either for some utopian past or some utopian future, rather than an optimism of taking the very best from what we currently have. If you were to read the press, view the media, to listen to commentaries, you would consider that we have one of the worst educational institutions in the world. And yet, every year, and we know this so much in Townley, we have students and teachers from all over the globe coming to learn from us. Now clearly, if we were that bad, that would not be the case, would it? The fact we don't appear on some particular PISA table at some point by somebody else's measure doesn't mean that what we're doing isn't right. As Nikki quite rightly said, as soon as you start measuring character education, effectively you're destroying it. What you do have to have with character education is a belief in its value. Values cannot be measured. And as long as, although I'm pleased to hear that Ofsted are going to acknowledge character in schools, they quite rightly are not going to start measuring it. When we've got an average point score for character education, we've got it horribly wrong. Everything we have tried to measure, we have destroyed, because we value what we measure, rather than measuring what we really value. So if we want to create educational organisations and institutions, we must do so with optimism. It is not sufficient to teach young people optimism in their lives if we don't convey it as adults and as leaders ourselves in the way that we collaborate and work and create. It is our desire, if we can use that the Odyssey Trust becomes the best of all possible worlds. A way to bring together students and teachers and organisations, sometimes from very different perspectives, but not so often, and with very different strengths and perhaps also weaknesses, to make something that is greater than the sum of their parts. That's, for me and for the Trust, the vision of optimism. We take the very best and we share it. Thank you.